before turning attention to the impactful speech recently delivered by Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. It is equally important to examine another nation grappling with intensifying political turmoil and societal unrest. Kenya, a critical economic powerhouse in East Africa, finds itself navigating a dark chapter characterized by unexplained disappearances of its citizens. Since June 2024, at least 82 Kenyans have vanished under unclear circumstances, including 6 cases reported in the past 2 weeks. These abductions have instilled widespread fear, sparking criticism from opposition leaders, human rights organizations, and the public. Many blame the disappearances on a state-led campaign to silence dissent, pointing accusations at President William Ruto's administration. While Kenya has traditionally been viewed as a bastion of stability in a volatile region, this reputation conceals a history of political tension, contested elections, and state crackdowns on opposition. President Ruto ascended to power in 2022 after a closely fought election. His main rival, Raila Odinga, disputed the results in court, but the judiciary upheld Ruto's victory. However, the political environment remained fraught. Ruto's administration has since introduced policies, including controversial tax reforms and measures perceived as consolidating executive power, exacerbating public discontent. The mid-2024 abductions underscore the nation's fragile political climate. Human rights advocates see them as symptoms of systemic issues, erosion of democratic freedoms, and misuse of state security forces to suppress dissent. Protests ignited by government-proposed tax hikes in June 2024 set the stage for this turmoil. These measures, including increased levies on fuel and essential goods, disproportionately impacted Kenya's poor and middle-class citizens. Localized demonstrations swiftly evolved into a nationwide movement, uniting people across ethnic and political divides. Beyond opposing tax increases, protesters expressed anger over rising unemployment, pervasive corruption, and the government's perceived neglect of pressing social issues. As the protests gained traction, the government responded with authoritarian measures, deploying security forces that often used excessive force to disperse crowds. Reports of arbitrary arrests, harassment, and physical assaults became commonplace. Amid this environment of state repression, the wave of abductions began to unfold. A consistent pattern marks these disappearances. Victims are often young men and women involved in organizing protests or expressing criticism of the government, particularly through social media. Witnesses recount incidents where individuals were seized by armed men in unmarked vehicles, often in broad daylight. In several instances, the abductors identified themselves as police officers, though the government has denied any involvement. Families of the disappeared are left in the dark as law enforcement agencies refuse to investigate or provide information. Human rights organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have extensively documented these cases. According to their findings, many victims endure torture, secret detentions, or extrajudicial executions. Kenya's security forces, including its police and intelligence services, have faced long-standing accusations of such practices, with roots tracing back to the Moi regime in the 1980s and 1990s. Under President Ruto, these tactics appear to have resurfaced, now targeting digital dissenters in particular. Analysts suggest the rise of social media as a tool for political mobilization has prompted the government to adopt more covert methods of repression. A recent report by the Kenyan National Commission on Human Rights, KNCHR, highlights the role of a clandestine police unit implicated in the disappearances. The report alleges that this unit operates under the direct supervision of senior government officials who justify these actions as necessary to maintain public order. However, these measures have fueled public outrage rather than quelling dissent. Protests demanding accountability and the release of the abducted have erupted in cities nationwide. Civil society groups have organized vigils and awareness campaigns, while opposition leaders call for independent investigations. The international community has also voiced concern. Countries and organizations, including the United Nations, have urged the Kenyan government to uphold democratic freedoms and respect citizens' rights to expression and assembly. Despite mounting pressure, the government remains defiant. President Ruto has dismissed allegations of state involvement in the disappearances as politically motivated, accusing the opposition of destabilizing the nation. Kenya's crisis reflects a troubling trend in East Africa, where governments increasingly resort to authoritarian measures to maintain control. Similar patterns of repression have emerged in Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda, raising alarm over the erosion of democratic norms in the region. However, Kenya's position as a regional hub for trade, diplomacy, and security heightens the stakes. The abductions not only threaten Kenya's internal cohesion, but also tarnish its reputation as a stable democracy. Addressing this crisis requires a multifaceted approach. The government must first acknowledge the severity of the issue and commit to transparent investigations into the disappearances. Strengthening oversight mechanisms, reforming the security sector, and holding perpetrators accountable are crucial steps. Civil society has an essential role in advocating for change by amplifying the voices of victims' families and raising awareness. Activists can exert pressure on the government to act. Meanwhile, the international community must remain engaged, using diplomatic channels and economic incentives to encourage reform. While external pressure alone cannot resolve the crisis, it can catalyze domestic efforts for change. The ongoing disappearances represent a grave challenge to Kenya's democratic foundation. As protests persist and public anger grows, the government faces a critical decision: address the root causes of dissent or risk deeper instability. For the families of the disappeared, this fight for justice is deeply personal, marked by pain and uncertainty. Yet their resilience and the determination of ordinary Kenyans to demand accountability provide a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. Kenya's history has shown its people's ability to overcome daunting challenges. The question now is whether the government will rise to meet this moment or perpetuate the cycle of repression and resistance. The path forward is fraught with difficulty, but it also holds the potential for a reimagined future grounded in justice and democratic principles.